Welcome to Holistic Health for Happy Kids, the podcast where we dive into the root causes of children's health challenges and explore natural solutions to help little ones thrive. I'm Lisa, a passionate paediatric naturopath and mum of 3, dedicated to empowering parents with practical tips and expert insights to raise healthy, happy kids. Each episode will unpack common childhood health concerns like allergies, eczema, fussy eating, and gut health, and share evidence-based advice to support your child's wellness naturally. Let's create a generation of thriving children, one holistic step at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. So today we're welcoming to the podcast Toni Chambers, who is going to talk about aggression in children. So Toni is one of our nutritionists here at the Paediatric Naturopath, and she's got lots and lots of experience with treating kids with issues such as aggression, oppositional defiance disorder, ADHD, all those sorts of acronym issues. So Toni, thanks for joining me today on Holistic Health for Happy Kids. Do you want to just tell me a little bit about your background and how you found yourself to be a nutritionist working in this area?
Sure, Lisa, thanks for having me. I've got a little bit of an interesting background, I guess. I started my career, my working life as a journalist, and then I decided that I wanted to change when my second son was about 4 months old. I went and I just took one class. It was food as medicine at college. It was just at night, and it was kind of something for me. And I just fell in love with the whole concept of food as medicine. And I think that's why I just stuck with nutrition rather than doing herbal medicine as well. It's just the power of nutrients and the fact that whatever we put into our mouth has a physiological effect. So it can be positive or negative, but it really comes down to, the biochemistry of the body and how our food is so important to the running of our biochemistry in our body. And now I have 4 children. I just love kids. I've always loved kids. I'm an only child. Maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe it's my parents' fault. I've always worked with kids ever since I graduated. It really is my passion. And I've kind of fallen into the behavioral side of things and the aggression side of things rather than the more kind of immune presentations. And I really do love that side of things because we all make a massive difference to families, but I feel like the behavioral disorders can really completely disrupt a family. And when you can help families with that, you help the whole family, not just that one child.
That's a really good point, actually, because those are sort of things that actually break down families entirely compared to, immune issues or all those other sorts of issues. It's the behavioral things that can actually break a family apart.
Yeah.
And
And as you see mums telling this story, and they just look like they haven't slept in so long, or they haven't had a rest or a break. So it's really debilitating.
yeah. And so today we're going to be talking about aggression, which I do find to be a bit of a taboo subject because certainly not many people are up there on Instagram talking about being hit and kicked by their child. So whenever parents come to see you and they say they've got an issue with aggression and their child, what sorts of things are they actually describing when they come to see you?
They're punching they're punching their mother, mostly mother or father, their siblings. They're kicking, biting, headbutting the wall. They're throwing things at the wall. They're yelling, they're screaming. But it's not just the normal, normal tantrum we're talking about where the yelling and screaming behavior occurs for like a few minutes. We're talking about sometimes 30 to 40 minutes. The child has to be removed, put into another room, and just kind of calmed down. And some parents will even say they can tell that their child just can't stop or they can't control their behavior. And mostly, unfortunately, it is in the home. It does spill out into outside the home a lot of times, though, but the worst behavior tends to be, I see anyway, in the home towards the parents. and siblings. However, one boy I had was suspended from primary school for punching a fellow student and a teacher. So that was obviously horrible for the family and the child as well.
And you're right, like these kids, they cannot, when they're in that moment, it's not like they really have a choice, like it's out of their control. And I always just think it must be awful for them to feel like that. Like obviously it's awful for the people who are, copying the abuse, but it also must be a terrible feeling for that child to know that they're out of control.
Absolutely. And the parents as well, because I feel like there's a bit of a social stigma. There's a bit of judgment when other parents see that type of behavior in another person's child. It's like, oh, is that a discipline issue? And it's actually not anything to do with discipline. It's just we'll get into it. But yeah, I feel like there's a big social stigma for parents with this type of presentation.
Yeah, for sure. And so, what do you think is the reason that aggression is becoming more common in children today?
Oh, there's so many things. There's a lot of things that we can't control, like as what with what we do. We refer for those types of things to other specialists. So things like past trauma history, family dynamics, parental relationship, role modeling, those types of things. Counselors and psychologists are really important parts of the child's care team for that type of thing. We can certainly be a listening ear, but that's kind of out of our scope. But there are so many things that we can do to help. So things that we can modify and that I believe are implicated in the increasing incidence of aggression and irritability is the increasingly processed foods that we're consuming, our nutrient poor diet as a result, our increasingly toxic world. And here I'm talking about things like air quality, water quality, Wi-Fi and screens that we're constantly bombarded with. We've got that constant blue light exposure that puts our nervous systems kind of constantly got that on switch flicked on. Our nervous systems rather are constantly on as a result. And this all drives stress and inflammation and can themselves drive nutrient deficiencies. So do you want an example of the nutrient
Yeah,
deficiency?
definitely.
So one of my favorites, I'm going to talk about my other favorite later, but one of my favorites would have to be zinc. And we know how overfarmed our soils are, and more often than not, those soils and food as a result are nutrient poor compared to when you and I were growing up. And so if we add in the fact then that we might have high copper, and we know that high copper displaces zinc, other heavy metals also displace zinc, phthalates and other toxins in our plastics bind to zinc in the body. Then if we're on a restricted diet, we aren't getting enough zinc. And if we're in puberty, we have a higher demand for zinc. And other things that increase demand for zinc are things like stress and immune issues and detoxification routes in the liver. So the higher the toxic load, the more pressure the liver is under to detoxify those substances. So then we've got a situation where we're zinc deficient and we need zinc. We'll talk about that later, but we need zinc for many different things in the body that will lead to aggression and behavioral conditions and disturbances in kids.
Because, and a lot of people think, when kids start to go through puberty and things like aggression get worse, people say, oh, it's just their hormones. But it's also the zinc because yes,
Mm.
whenever you're having that period of rapid growth, you use up all your zinc. So I think it's really important that people don't just say, oh, it's just their hormones because
Yeah.
a gross simplification. And what about gut health? Do you see any link between like gut health and aggression?
Mm. Yeah, and so that's another thing is that dysbiosis or like an imbalance between good and bad bacteria in the gut that also comes back to our diet as well. So if we're not having fibers, and a lot of kids, that they might be fussy eaters or they're not getting as much fiber, veggies, fruits as what they potentially could be. And obviously we need those fibers to keep us regular, but also they feed our gut, our good gut bacteria, which produce metabolites. They're the good guys, and short chain fatty acids that really help our immune system function and regulation. And also gut bacteria produce neurotransmitters and vitamins. So we need gut bacteria to produce some of our serotonin and dopamine. And when those are out of balance, that can contribute to signs and symptoms of irritability and aggression.
When I was at the Mind Forum earlier this year, we were talking, the speakers were talking a lot about your gut isn't really your second brain, it's actually your first brain.
Mm-hmm.
So the impact that that has on how children think is
Mm-hmm.
really strong. And what about infections? Do you ever see aggression with like an infectious trigger?
Absolutely, yeah. So you've got can be strep, and that can lead to something called pandas. But there are other infections like Lyme or mycoplasma pneumonia or even herpes simplex that can cause and drive PANS, which can cause a really sudden onset of symptoms. So that's quite through history taking, we can determine how was it gradual? Were the symptoms gradual or did it happen, suddenly? And so then we can kind of distinguish between those infections.
And you mentioned earlier that, outside observers to a family dynamic might have a lot of finger pointing and blaming on the parents. But what about the parents themselves? Like, do they usually understand that the aggression is a symptom of something within their child, or do they think it's a discipline issue?
Most parents don't. They know well, I think they probably go through a range of different phases. I think maybe there would be some part of them that thinks, is this our parenting style? They will often have already been to do a parenting course potentially. But I think innately and instinctively they know that there's something else at play. And that's generally when they come to see us. They might have been to see a lot of other people first, but they know that instinctively there's something else at play. It's not just discipline.
Mm. I think some of those parenting courses are great. Like I often
Mm,
benefit from reading books, and my husband has as well, about how to actually deal with
mm,
stuff. But I think often what you see is someone might have three or four children, and it's only one of them that has an
mm-hmm,
aggression issue, which clearly shows that it's not a parenting issue, that it's
mm,
more individualized.
yeah.
Um, so whenever someone comes to see you, you obviously you have your hat on for nutrition and functional medicine. What's the first sort of things that you run through with that family to try and get to the bottom of their anger, etc.?
Well, the very first thing is what's their diet like? What are they eating? And I can tell it's not just what they're eating, but how much they're eating. What's their appetite like? What are their nutritional gaps? Working out what their gut function is like as well. Are they moving their bowels, for example? That's something really simple, but if they're not moving their bowels, that can be in and of itself can make us feel horrible. We all know how horrible it feels when you don't, do a poo every day, excuse me.
Yeah.
Um, and if it's sometimes it can be, 7 to 10 days. I've had a patient who, that's how often she moves her bowels. So that just is it makes us feel terrible, but physiologically we're just not able to rid the body of the toxins that, for example, that we're all exposed to, that the liver kind of detoxifies, that we need to eliminate from the body. So they're not being recycled. So that's the first thing. What are they eating? What are the nutritional gaps? Are their bowels moving? Do they have an appetite? Then I want to know, has their behavior changed gradually over time or was it sudden? I'd like to know if they're drinking tap water. There's a really interesting study in New South Wales that looked at people who drank tap water and they found that their copper levels were completely off the charts. So we know that copper is a big contributor to anger and aggression, and water is also a major source of heavy metals for all of us. And if I feel, I will actually often order a hair tissue mineral analysis because most kids will have some level of exposure. And then I want to know the child's potential toxin exposure in general. I want to know about their parents as well. What was their exposure, their grandparents' exposure, if possible, if it's possible to find out. Where do they live? Do they live near a golf course? Do they live near a main road? Do they live on a farm? There could be pesticide exposures. Are they on on tank water if they live on a farm? There could be, a parasite. They could be affected by a parasite if that's the case. I'd like to know what their stressors are as well. And we might think, what kind of stress does a child have? But even just the exposure to screens, like I said before, can be a stress to the body. High copper or heavy metals can be a stress to the body. Being super busy and not all sitting down and eating a meal together, but eating in the car is a stress for a little person. So when our cup is full and their nervous system is completely on, we know that ourselves, like when we're feeling under stress and someone says something, it's like that one drop of water in a full cup and we just can't handle it anymore and we just kind of react. So it's the same for little ones as well.
Yeah. And I was like, you contrast all the things that you just went through, like what do you eat? What do you drink? How often do you poo? Contrast that with when someone goes to see like the best pediatric psychiatrist that they can see. If you think what the questions they are going to ask, it's not going to be any of that.
Mm-mm.
I mean, no questions about what you're eating, what you're drinking, how much screen time. It's really just a which medication will we try first for this,
Mm-hmm.
which just blows my mind, really.
Mm, absolutely.
And then I don't haven't really thought about this much, but in Chinese medicine, the liver is to do with anger, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you're not pooing every day and the burden on your liver to detoxify all of these things, like that's like Chinese medicine, which has been around for thousands and thousands of years, would tie that back to anger as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Absolutely.
And so tell me a bit more about, so we've talked about the nutritional gaps and how that's important. So tell me about some, we've talked about zinc, but tell me about some other nutrient deficiencies that are important for mood and impulse control.
So the other one that I love is magnesium, and it's exactly the same as zinc as far as our intake from foods, unfortunately. So even if we're having, green leafy vegetables and whole grains and nuts and legumes, which are the best sources of magnesium, even if we're having those, we might not be getting the same level of magnesium as we were decades ago because of our soil. And then when we cook them, the magnesium is lost. So about 80% of magnesium is lost. Magnesium's important because it is intimately involved in brain function. So it helps the production of neurotransmitters like GABA and serotonin. And those are responsible for calm in the body and emotional stability. And it also really helps us modulate our stress response. So if we're under pressure and we're magnesium deficient, or under stress rather, and our HPA axis is activated and we are depleted in magnesium, we will be more prone to acting out, I suppose. And some research has shown lower magnesium in people with ADHD, and many times people with ADHD will have that kind of anger irritability profile.
Mm.
So if we look at animal studies, we can't correlate causation or cause and effect with animal studies, but we can look at animal studies to understand how things are working. And so how magnesium works is it reduces epinephrine and norepinephrine. So increases in those neurotransmitters are shown in the brains of people with aggressive behavior. Magnesium also blocks glutamate binding to NMDA receptors in the brain. And essentially what that means is glutamate is our excitatory neurotransmitter. And when it binds to NMDA receptors in the brain, that causes excitotoxicity and excitatory neurotransmission, which is essentially aggression, is a symptom, can be a symptom of that. Low serotonin as well increases aggression, and magnesium reduces serotonin turnover and increases serotonin amounts. So adequate serotonin inhibits aggression.
Yeah. Is there anything that magnesium can't do?
No, nothing. It does everything.
And the good thing is about magnesium is that some of the forms that we use actually make a delicious drink. So if
Mhm.
my kids are getting a wee bit, a little bit angsty, I'll just say, oh, go and make yourself a little drink of magnesium there, and they love it, and they'll drink it, and then
Mhm.
everything just calms down a little bit. And then what about B6?
Yeah, well, B6 is a vital cofactor for producing all of those neurotransmitters we talked about, GABA in particular, and serotonin.
Yeah. Now you mentioned copper a few times, and I always think it's funny, see people drinking from copper water bottles where they're
Yeah.
actually actively going to be increasing their copper levels. I often want to just have a chat to them and see how they're feeling. But tell me a bit about copper.
Yeah, and I've actually got a personal story with this. We were in a house where we had to drink tap water for a little while, and my boys, my two oldest boys were teenagers at the time, and they just started getting really angsty, like you were just saying about your kids, and to the point where they were getting a bit angry. And I put a new filter on the tap water, gave them some magnesium as well, and honestly, within a couple of weeks, they'd really calmed down, and I think it was the copper, and yeah, I think it was the copper playing a role in the water. Anyway,
Yeah.
so we've got the highest concentrations of zinc in the brain, and what copper does is it's obviously an essential mineral, so we do need copper. We can't live without copper. But like zinc and iron, it is required for normal development and function of the brain. If there is an issue with deficiency and excess. So we do need it. We kind of need that Goldilocks amount. But what copper does, it has a direct antagonistic effect on zinc in our body. So if we've got too much copper, we will get signs of zinc deficiency, even if we're getting enough zinc. So it will be as though we're zinc deficient. So we'll get signs like we might have low stomach acid, which means our kids might be burping or they might not have an appetite. Their wounds might take a little bit longer to heal, or they might have immune issues that are new, like constantly getting sick. So those are some zinc deficiency signs. But when we have high copper, it accumulates in the brain, and that can lead to neuroinflammation and produces what we call reactive oxygen species. And they are just things that can go on to damage the surrounding cells and cause neurotoxicity. And that can manifest as issues with learning and memory, but also behavior.
Yeah. You said whenever you had the two kids and you started to learn about food as medicine, it was like just wow. Even though I have a background in food and nutrition, whenever I started studying nutrition after I think I was pregnant with my third child, even though I knew a lot of it, whenever you learn all this stuff about the importance of zinc and magnesium for all these different things, it's just like, why is this not taught in high school? Like
Mm.
it's the fundamental for a healthy life. It helps you understand why you need to eat well because of what zinc does and because B6 does this and magnesium does that. That's why we need to eat green leafy vegetables and nuts and seeds. It's not about weight management or looking good or anything. It's literally for the building blocks for your
Mhm.
brain. I
Mhm.
think that should be taught a lot more in school, or I don't think it's taught at all in school. It really should be taught, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, they do have like nutrition is part of the curriculum, but I've been into those classrooms and they basically teach the food pyramid.
Yeah.
They're not actually teaching kids why they need to eat things and relating it back to what is important for them. Like I think teenagers, it's their skin or the way they look.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we really need to get into schools and do a bit more work there.
Yeah, the absolute groundwork. So you've talked a lot about water filters and toxic load. Tell me a little bit about some of the toxins or heavy metals that you see associated with aggression and other behavioral issues.
Yeah, so apart from the copper, that's a really common one. Then I'll see cadmium. Cadmium is I've actually seen quite a bit lately, and lead as well. Like lead is really strongly linked in the research to ADHD in particular, and some of those behaviors. But what we see on a hair tissue mineral analysis, for example, is not just the child's exposure, but the parents and the grandparents' exposure that can be transferred through the placenta and in utero to the child. And now we think as well it can be transferred via sperm, which I think is really interesting. So when parents get the results and they might see things off the chart, they're always worried and they're blaming themselves about, what have I exposed my child to? But it's not just the current exposure. It goes back 2 generations. So that's the exposure side. But then if you've got genetic SNPs in detoxification pathways, then it's very hard, or it's harder for us to detoxify those heavy metals and other, not just heavy metals, but any kind of environmental toxins. And then, like we said, if they're constipated, then everything's being recycled. And then if they're deficient in the zinc and magnesium and other things like selenium and molybdenum, then the liver's detox pathways can't function optimally anyway. So I've talked a lot about heavy metals, but other environmental toxins are those things like present in air pollution and plastics and non-stick cookware. Things like, BPA, we see stickers on water bottles all the time, BPA free, but there are a host of other bisphenols that are problematic. Phthalates and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So those are the ones that line the non-stick cookware. And flame retardants as well. They're in brand new furniture. So they all have to go through the liver. And they generally cause neurological damage, which affects brain function. And toxic load is how much we're exposed to versus how well our organs of detoxification can eliminate all of the byproducts from our bodies. So that's not just our liver, but our kidneys and our gastrointestinal tract as well. So that's why daily bowel movements is really at the top of the list as far as getting that going is concerned.
Yeah. You've given us some great information about, nutrient deficiencies and toxins. But what would be some of the simple sort of changes that a parent who's listening to this can do straight away to reduce irritability and meltdowns? Like, what can people actually take away from this to do straight away?
First of all, what kind of water are you drinking? That'd be one of the very first things I would look at. And it's easy, it's fairly cheap to install a water filter, a reverse osmosis water filter as a one that you can take from place to place is at probably the cheapest one. So it's about $300 or $400. So that's what I'd do. And then I would look at the diet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what would be some quick wins a parent could make from a dietary perspective?
Breakfast, even if it's just looking at one meal. If breakfast is too hard because it's too chaotic and busy in the mornings, then you can focus on dinner. But I generally find that dinner isn't too bad anyway. Like that's generally the best meal of the day. But breakfast, so just remove any of those carbohydrate laden options and replace with a good protein, maybe some veggies, like as in spinach, if you can get some in there. If not, avocado, feta, lemon juice, bit of olive oil and sea salt with it, with some eggs. Yum. Yeah, just start with a really good protein-rich breakfast.
Yeah. And people always think, when they come to see a nutritionist that their child will be put on some sort of um, difficult diet. But think of the breakfast that you just talked about, like the avocado with some feta and like that's delicious.
Mm-hmm.
There's no need to think that you're going to see a nutritionist that are going to put you on a mean diet, like a hard diet.
No.
It's actually so much more lush than just giving somebody a bowl of, breakfast cereal. And it's funny as well, like I used to work for the main breakfast cereal manufacturer in Australia, and yet I literally have not, I don't think I've ever bought my kids a box of breakfast cereal, and my eldest is 17 because it's just it's not real food, is it? It's just
No, it's just
processed stuff.
no, and it says on the box, like there's folate and B vitamins and it's got the health tick but no, it's empty. It's not really doing anything apart from spiking your blood sugar.
Yeah. And even when it says on the ingredient list contains folate, that's actually incorrect. It contains folic acid. It
Yeah,
blows my mind how that just slips through the loophole and they're allowed to write folate when it's absolutely not folate. Folate is the spinach that you just spoke about, not what's in a breakfast cereal. Um,
absolutely.
so tell me some of like the biggest turnarounds that you've seen in clinics. So kids
Hmm.
who really went from, wild, explosive to behavior to being like, happy, calm family members.
Hmm. So there was one family of the siblings, so there were three of them. They were all medicated. So they were all on a medication for sleep in the evening, and they were on a medication for ADHD in the morning. and it wasn't hitting the sides really. And so I did a hair tissue mineral analysis on them, and they came back with off the charts cadmium and high copper. So not off the charts copper, but off the charts cadmium. And so when we were going through the potential sources, it turned out that mum's family all were smokers, and they used to smoke in the home when she was growing up. She didn't smoke, but she was a passive smoker. So that was a really easy kind of determinant. We determined that was the issue, and it wasn't present as well. So it wasn't like we had a dad who was currently smoking in the home. We had to kind of help him stop smoking. It was past. So that was much easier to kind of help remove the cadmium and balance the copper. And eventually, because the medication wasn't really helping anyway, we were able to eventually come off the medication in consultation with the doctor. Like, we never just do it. And and so now they're much better. It does take time though. Like, it's not a magic bullet. Like, it does take time to remove the heavy metals slowly so that you're not causing any further issues in the kids. But that was a nice outcome for that family.
I so often see kids who have been put on risperidone or different medications like that, and it's actually not working and it's actually not helping. But I find once someone goes on to a medication, nobody wants to take them off, as if things are going to get worse, even though it not help. But if the reason for the aggression is the cadmium, which is cadmium is a big issue, I think, where I live in the Illawarra. I see a lot of kids with extremely, extremely high cadmium. Like, the medication's not going to work because the problem is not a lack of risperidone. The problem is too much cadmium. So, and then you fix that problem, you fix it for life.
Absolutely. And that comes back to your point earlier about going to see a doctor and they don't ask any questions that we ask. It's like nothing will work unless you fix the biochemistry. Nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. So for parents who've been listening today who just feel extremely overwhelmed with everything that we've just talked about, what is the first step that you would get them to take?
Book in with me.
Yes.
That's a bit cheeky.
That's absolutely right, though, because for every child, it's going to be different. So we've talked about, magnesium deficiency, zinc deficiency, cadmium excess, lead excess, infectious triggers. It's going to be different. No two children are the same. And it's only when you actually spend an hour going through all these questions that you actually find out what it is for your child. Isn't that right?
Exactly. And it doesn't matter what influencer has used what supplement on their child and tells you that it works. Because I know that, parents are worried, they're up at night, they're scrolling, they're trying to find answers. And those cookie cutter type supplements or solutions, they won't work. They might work. You might be lucky and it might work, but there are so many different facets that we have to find out what is the issue for your child specifically and work on an individualized response to get the best response. Then you're not wasting money and you're not wasting time and you're not getting more frustrated.
Yeah, you have a targeted approach, which will end up cheaper in the long term. Well, thank you so much, Toni. I have learned a lot today, and I'm sure everybody else listening has as well. But if you like this podcast, please share it with a friend and please follow it on your podcast app. And thank you very much, Toni, for spending some time with us today. And I'm sure we'll have you back on the podcast again soon.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks for tuning in to Holistic Health for Happy Kids. I hope you found today's episode helpful and inspiring on your journey to raise thriving, healthy little ones. Remember, small, consistent changes can lead to big transformations. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at the Paediatric Naturopath for more tips, tools, and inspiration. If you've got a question or a topic you'd love to hear about, please send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and keep supporting your kids in the most natural, nurturing ways possible.